Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the BG Independent Podcast. I'm your host, Dustin Galish. In this episode, we talked to Julie Carle, who's a staff writer for us here at BG Independent News, and has been covering the Wood County Fair for, I think, since 1978. So I sat down with Julie at the Wood County Fair this week to discuss what's coming up, the history, and why it's really important just to be aware of what's going on in the fair. We are here at the Wood County Fair, just hanging out in a really quiet place because this is if you're going to do a podcast, this seems ideal. There's a lot of banging going on and animals and all kinds of stuff here at the fair, which is what we expect. But Julie, welcome to the second episode of the BG Independent Podcast. I appreciate you coming here today because we're going to really talk about the fair, what's going on, a little bit about the history, and just, pick your brain a little bit about, why people should come out this year. So thank you for coming.
You bet. I'm happy to be here. The fair is in my blood.
Yeah, and I think when I talked to Dave and Jan, specifically Dave had talked about your history here and how long you've been a part of this program. And what was your job prior? They mentioned that you were involved with the fair in specifics. What was that?
It was, again, as a reporter, I was for a local resource, local newspaper, and I was the farm editor at the time. And so for about 20 years, I covered the fair day in and day out from 1979 to 1988.
In many ways, the farm, that's what this is all about in some ways, right? That's the core of what the fair is it's about people, you're showing animals, that's the culture that sort of it spawned. And there's games and there's these activities and stuff, which seems like a byproduct of what the real core of what the fair is really just people showing off their farm, their property, and there's a culture of that. Can you explain a little bit about maybe like the origins of why we have the fair every year? That's not just, to eat cheese curds and ride rides, right? That's great, but...
It is great, but no, you're right. It actually goes back, the first fair in Wood County was 1851, and it was strictly agricultural at that point. It was, people brought in, and it was at harvest time. So it was later in the fall. It was usually kind of October, late September, early October. And they would bring in their corn and their soybeans and their tomatoes, and the farm wives would bring in their baked goods and their needlework. So that was kind of the core of what it started as. I don't think there wasn't any kind of, there may have been like vendors for food, but it was, there weren't rides. It was truly an agricultural focus. That was the focus. And that went on through, I think, 1927. And then it stopped. They didn't have enough money. There were some, I think the year of 1927, it had some financial issues, I think, but 1927 there was a fire just before the fair, and it kind of took the wind out of their sails at that point. So they didn't have a fair again until 1951. And so when that next iteration of the fair came around, it was agricultural based because, that's where we are. We're in the middle of cornfields, soybean fields. And so that was still the root of it. But in that time frame, the junior fair stuff had already kind of come into play, the 4-H groups, the FFAs. And so those were the groups that kind of helped expand the fair beyond just the family bringing their agricultural stuff. Students were bringing their livestock and their crops and all of their 4-H projects.
It's interesting. I think you think about all the stuff that's at the fair. It's quite a bit. It's an undertaking of how much is involved with it now. I mean, there's so many departments. There's just so many different tents. People are selling different goods. You have music, entertainment, destruction derbies, the small time tractor pull elements, things like that. So when did that really start to really be what the experience was in the fair? As we get to present day, was that something that started more like in the 70s or 80s, where there was more of that aspect of it? Because there's a lot of other things happening at fairs now that, as you say, we go from just farming to then now we're showing the animals. Maybe there's some elements of that, but a lot of this stuff is way outside of that realm of just farming.
True.
You know what I mean? When did that really start?
I don't know. I can't give it.
You say you started in the 70s, sort of reporting here, and can you maybe give us what was it like here?
It wasn't all that much different then.
No.
Actually, they were more known for having bigger concerts at the time.
Okay.
And again, not huge, but again, you could pay for a star a little bit easier in the 70s than you can in the 2020s. So
concerts were a big part of that era.
They actually were. And it was like, again, not huge names, but I think Miami Sound Machine was here before they hit it big. The Beach Boys have been here a couple of times. Sure. Bachman Turner Overdrive. So there were some good concerts. And again, I know, I can't tell you a year, but I was talking to one of the Fair Board members, and she did some kind of historical research for this year since it's the 150th fair. And she was telling me that, and I don't remember if it was at the first fair in 1851 or if it was later on, I don't remember. But she said like that one of the entertainment things was a trained buffalo.
Sure. I mean, that wouldn't be too out of place even today if someone showed up with one, right? You know,
right.
That sort of sounds right.
So the acts were a little bit more circusy
sure.
at that time. And so again, I think it's kind of evolved since then. You don't have quite the same, circus feel as far as that goes. But again, the vendors this year, I heard that everybody was sold, all the spaces were sold out. And if when you walk around, you can see it's everything from food to, commercial products and all, under the commercial tent or the grandstands, all those commercial venues are there. So,
yeah, I mean, is there anything else that's really been running this long? I mean, this is probably the longest running, thing regionally, right? And the idea of the county fair. Is there anything else you could, it's a big question to ask. Is there anything else that's run this long? But this has to be sort of one of the longest traditions.
I think it has to be. Again, I don't know that for a fact, obviously,
sure.
but. Again.
We'll just say it is, and we'll act like it's true, yeah. But it seems right. But in many ways, it has to be. If it's something else has been running, no one's heard about it. Because it's sort of built into any place you live, there's a county fair, I think, at this point, right? Is
right.
That sort of, is Ohio known for its
Actually,
fairs
it really
more
is.
So than, yeah,
it really
like.
was. And again, in the day, Wood County was considered like the second biggest or the second best in the state. Because it was a good fair. It's right. Still a good fair. If you go to other fairs that are kind of more urban-based, again, Lucas County and some of those other that are more city-based, you won't see the same kind of participation.
Sure.
You don't see the same kind of attendance. It's a really good feel at Wood County.
All right, well, let's get into now more of the now. We kind of talked a little about the history, which I think is important. Because a lot of us, just all our memories are like we went as kids and we were pretty focused on just what we were eating, the rides, and didn't think about it too much. And I think as an adult, when I've come back to the fair, having a child now, so you're sort of re-experiencing some of these things that you did as a kid, which is kind of fun, and I think it's kind of bringing it full circle for me. Just notice all the small details of what's, right now we're surrounded by, potatoes and corn and pictures of, crayon pictures. So it's pretty nice. So let's talk a little bit more about what's happening this year at the fair. Is there anything significant that they're doing for the 150th that people should be aware of? Because there's, obviously it's a long week. There's a lot of opportunity to come visit the fair. Maybe what days do you feel like are more important, for different types of interests?
Again, it depends on what your interests are. There's a couple more. Again, yesterday was a really big day from the historical perspective. They had the celebration of the 150th fair, and they had there were over 24, maybe 3 dozen of former junior fair king and queens that were here. And so there's just this room of people that were standing together, sitting together, and talking about the past fair. So that's really, again, what the Fair Board has tried to do, I think, is to bring that historical feel to the fair this year. And they're trying to bring people back that haven't been here for a while or that have that in their blood, I guess, so to speak. So it was so cool to see all the junior fair king and queens. There was Betty Michaels Anderson was Miss Wood County in 1961. So she came back at the age of 81 to do that. She's local, so she comes back pretty frequently. But again, just that whole historical feel is pretty important. The other historical one that's in my head is the showmanship sweepstakes, which is when one person from each of the different livestock areas has been named champion showman in their breed or in their animal livestock, and then they come together and they have to show all the different animals, and so it's a pretty big deal at the Wood County Fair. So all the past showmanship winners are coming back this year, and again they're going to do that same kind of thing where they're bringing everybody together and celebrating the history of that competition. So that's pretty cool. Some of the other big events, probably, again, the biggest ones, and it always surprises me, are the demolition derbies. So they have 2 nights of demolition derbies. One is they have a whole bunch of different ones, like combine, lawnmower, power wheels, and I'm trying to think there's something else that's kind of novelty. And then the next night is our cars and trucks. And the grandstands are packed. People love the demolition derbies, love them.
No, I remember actually years ago filming it. I had got a press pass when I was working for another company, and my boss was like, "You really want to do that?" And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, why not? I mean, when are you gonna have an excuse to get close?" I got pretty close, and it was intense, but the place was packed. It was exciting. I mean, there's something very primal about that, just to see things kind of be destroyed. Especially with the farm culture, there's just about different power, different engineering, because this place still is relevant to a lot of the sort of tractor pull culture. There's overlap there. I mean, it's going to be here in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
So there's always that. And so, what about from the music standpoint, entertainment? I think, and there is also what I remember is there's sort of a senior day, if I remember too, where that's usually a bigger event for y'all each year, and so we get discount, or maybe it's free admission.
It's free admission.
There's more artists and things like that for them.
Yes, it's free admission for the seniors, and I believe it's on Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. It's on Thursday, and so they do a whole day of music and raffles, and they do lunch for the seniors. You had to already RSVP for the lunch, but they do a whole day, so there's all kinds of music. And again, it's tending towards a senior population. It's not the Friday night concert with the country stars, but it's a full day of activities.
So let's talk a little bit about the lineup for sort of the main event, music this year, and who is that, and sort of when is that happening, and what can people expect from those shows?
The show is Friday night at 8:00 in front of the grandstands. It's Craig Morgan and Easton Corbin, both country stars. I don't know a lot about them, but they have a pretty good background, pretty good bios. I know that they've already sold out the VIP tickets.
Oh, really?
For that.
I saw that they were offering that, so I think that was a pretty smart move, actually. They sold out, so that worked out.
Yep, the VIP sold out, and then there's track seats and then general admission grandstand seats. So, again, this is the first time in 6 years that they've had a concert, a pretty big name concert. So they're pretty excited. They're hoping it works. Again, with the weather, it should be a good deal for them.
Why has it been so long? I think I do remember it was Martina McBride here. I think it might have been maybe about that long ago, if I remember. It might have been one of the last bigger names that they had here, right?
Yeah, it's been a while.
They didn't even have any music on the grand stage, right? It was all the Grove stuff and sort of off stage kind of stuff, right?
Right. Again, just financially, they couldn't do it.
Okay.
Again, bringing big names, even halfway big names, it's just expensive, and their budget is tight as can be. So
where does the budget come from? This is kind of a good question to me. The funding, truly, where does the majority of the funding come for the fair? I mean, what is the bread and butter of that?
Well, they get a stipend from the state.
Okay.
So their state legislature approves it. They also have county funds from Wood County, and then it's general admission, getting people in the gates and paying for those kinds of things.
And how much of the workers here are volunteer versus paid employees? My instincts would say, hey, a lot of people are volunteering their time, but I could be incorrect.
No, you're very correct.
Okay.
It's a board of, I think, 24 people, or it's a big board, and everybody's a volunteer. There's, I think, 3 or 4 paid staff as far as throughout the year. And then they bring on some people seasonal to help, get the fairgrounds ready and those kinds of things.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It's one of those things you just assume, how does this actually happen every year, right? There's no way you could afford to pay all these teams to come in. And so it's really a labor of love here that's kept this thing going for so long.
It truly is, Dustin. And again, if you talk to the fair board members, you hear that in their voices. They just believe in what it's all about.
So let's kind of wrap up with that one. I think, it's nice to get an overview of everything that's going on, but one question I want to get to is really, why should people come to this? What is... why do we still have these? You know what I mean? It's a tradition for sure, and that's important. It's part of seemingly American culture, especially the Midwest, this whole idea of the county fair. So why do you feel like it's important why do you keep coming back? In some ways, how have you been sort of designated as sort of the representative, to report on this? Why is it important to you even?
That's a great question. Again, I don't have a farm background. The only farm I was ever on was my uncle's farm in western Kansas. But I'm not a farm girl. I wasn't in 4-H. But when I started, doing the fair back in 1979, again, the people, the families, it's such a strong tradition. And it kind of does just I mean, it's a feel-good event. I know it's hard for folks who aren't involved in the agricultural world or in 4-H in any way, shape, or form to understand. I mean, they think, they just don't have the right mindset, I think, sometimes. But it's part of the roots of what this community is all about. Mm-hmm. Whether or not you farm, you still eat. You still partake of all the goods that come out of the ground and the service that these folks do. So it's a way to support your community in my mind.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly Northwest Ohio. This is very it's a very plentiful place to produce food. I mean, it's sort of the soil is unique. It's sort of there's a huge history here. I think Ohio still. I think it's still the most. It's hard to explain. What am I trying to get to? Farming is still such a huge part of our economy. It's probably the most integral part, right? I mean, from the sense of like money, just everything involved with it. It's still probably the biggest industry in the state. Am I correct?
It's pretty. Again, I don't know that it is number one for sure, but it's right up there. And again, agriculture goes beyond just farmers growing crops. It's your manufacturers who are making tomato products and corn products and feeding us with whatever it is. So. It's if it's not number one, it's pretty close.
Yeah, I feel like there might have been a couple years where it was, because I think I saw billboards for it. I really, it's like at some point it might have, eclipsed something, where it's like, this is the most important thing. But you do forget that. I take it for granted how much of, Ohio, especially, and even Wood County itself, a lot of the resources are going into providing food for all kinds of different reasons. And
Yep.
So it's good to be aware of that. I think for me, I like coming to the fair because it's sort of a reminder of that. It reminds you of all these things that are happening sort of behind the scenes, because a lot of us live in these sort of pockets. I didn't grow up on a farm either. My grandfather did, but he had a garden. So it's different. So these people really are. This is for them really. It's a celebration of their lifestyle, their culture, and all the things they've been working on sort of behind the scenes. So I think that's what's kind of unique about it. And the food, in the end, the fair food, it always brings you back,
Yep.
It's always a little expensive, but they know why, so you show up. I think we were here for the July 4th, the Boomtown thing, which is, on the fairgrounds, and the food lines were just bizarre. And people were like, I'll wait an hour and a half for this corn dog, it was sort of, there's no other place that I can think of that has that as well, like who's going to really put in the time and effort to get that, that elephant ear or whatever it is that you just have to have once a year.
That's right. That's right. And that's the reason a lot of people do come to the fair. It's, if they have no other connection, it's to get the fries, it's to get that corn on the cob, it's to get that pork-a-lean sandwich.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm definitely one of those too. This will be kind of the last question, and we'll tie it up. But I think, is there, related to the food, I remember in last year or maybe the previous, they had sort of a time where you could come in just for the food. Is that still an option? Because some people, hey, I'd love to get lunch there, but I don't necessarily want to spend money on admission, because all I'm there for is the funnel cake or something. Is that still happening? Do you know?
I think you have to pay a $3 admission,
sure. Okay.
but it's not the $10 admission, and I think it's an 11 to 2 daily that you can come in and do lunch.
Great. All right. Well, Julie, thank you so much for having a conversation with me here today. This is we're starting to do these podcasts. I think for me, interviewing people on the video side, it always felt strange because you never hear the questions I'm asking. And and sometimes with video, you're trying to, take out anything that's excessive fat and trimming it down to this. And I like this longer form approach to try to learn more about things. And so it's a way of reporting for me, and hopefully it helps you sort of understand more what I'm doing here as well. So
it's been great. Thank you.
So thank you so much.
Yep.
And thank everybody for listening, and we'll be back with more podcasts in the future.